I'll try.
Test, test. There we go. All right, perfect. Thank you. I'm going to cut it off and then I'll cut it on in just a second. All right, good morning. Trust everybody is doing well. Hey. So we are in Daniel chapter 5. At some point this morning. Just one announcement this today. Next week we don't meet because that's an election day, and just to make it easy for people that are voting at St. Paul, particularly around parking. So we're not going to meet next week, but we will meet November the 15th. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Also, if you're joining us from home, you hopefully received an email from Betty Hips. That's a way for you to participate. Teresa, I'm getting a little bit of a feedback, so I don't know if that's something I'm doing or... Let me try that. Is that better? Nope. Worse? Yes, it is. It's like in stereo. Give me 1 second. Anyway, the prayer pad should be going around. We'll get this fixed in just a second. Yeah. So, give me 1 minute. Hey, Donna. We're getting a lot of feedback in the room.
Yeah, I took all the CPU off. Let me see. Because the only thing that is on is yours and the live stream.
What about?
Which is supposed to be. So, let me grab Logan real quick.
Okay. I'm pretty sure I messed the microphone up earlier. I was playing around with it and hit the wrong button, so they had to. She might have me turned off, so we're still test. Test, test, test. That one's on. That needs to be louder. So test. Now you can hear me better here. And y'all hear the feedback? Does it sound better? Yeah, so whatever, that fixed it. I don't know what you're saying, Mimi, so you got to say it louder. Oh, okay. I got you. So that needs to be no volume. So is that better? All right. So can y'all hear? Can you hear me, Sally? All right, good. How, Pam? Feedback? We good? No feedback? All right. So that's what the volume was on there. All right, perfect. Yeah, I think we're okay. Okay, good. All right. So Daniel chapter 5. So now I hear something. Y'all hear it? Well, we just have to grin and bear it and maybe get it fixed at the break. So Daniel chapter 5, that's going to annoy me. All right, so we will not meet today, nor the 8th. So she'll come back in here in just a second, see if we can fix it. With Daniel. All right, how about now? Is that better? Yeah, all right. So with Daniel 4, there is an issue with Nebuchadnezzar, and it has to do with his own pride. And he's humbled for a period of years, we think years, maybe 7, at least, or a period of time. And out of that, he has a change of heart after spending some time acting like an animal. Eventually does give praise to God, pretty much under Daniel's direction. And so at the end of chapter 4, there's a period of time between chapter 4 and chapter 5. Because we go from Nebuchadnezzar, who's chapter 4, who ruled over Babylon for 43 years, roughly. Well, when we get to chapter 5, we're down here with this guy, Belshazzar. But in between, there's the span of about 23 years or so, or not quite 20, yeah, about 23 years. And here are the kings, not that it matters if you want them, but there's a number of them are assassinated. There's, I think this one is assassinated, this one is assassinated, this one resigns after about 6 or 10 months. Maybe he didn't want to get assassinated. Nabonidus is the father of Belshazzar. He reigned for 17 years, but for the most part of his reign, he leaves Babylon and goes to another city to build this huge temple to the sun god. So we really don't know. I mean, he's not mentioned in the book of Daniel. He is mentioned in non-canonical sources, particularly Babylonian writings. He is listed, but he checks out from running the empire, at some point in these 17 years and leaves it to his son. And so his son is like a vice regent, or basically has the fort until he dies, which is what chapter 5 is about. So chapter 5 is the transition from the Babylonian Empire into the Medes and the Persians. So from 5, at the end of 5, so from chapter 6 to the end of the book, it has to do with a different empire. Now we're going to move into the Persians. If you go back to chapter 2, where Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and it's that big statue, and there's the head's gold, but then the chest area is, I think, silver, and then the stomach and the waist area is bronze, and then iron. And there's a big rock that is thrown at the statue, and it knocks the statue down. And of course, Daniel gives interpretation of the dream that the first part is the Babylonians, the second part are the Medes and the Persians. Well, Darius is a Mede, and eventually the Medes and the Persians sort of become one, and we sort of move into all the Persian kings that'll last for a while. So, but there's been 23 years since chapter 4 to chapter 5. So lots going on in the empire. And but this is the night that the Babylonians are no more. Or as Isaiah is quick to point out, and I forgot what chapter, maybe chapter 29 or something, where it says Babylon is fallen. So, anyways, all right, clear as mud on all the rulers, you know. So, and I mean, you can, if you want to go, it's like a soap opera in all this, and who they're marrying, and then one of them gets killed, and then they marry, and you know, and it's nuts. So, yeah, that's but 23 years, new guy on the block. Nebuchadnezzar's dead now, and has been for some time. So there's a pretty big time break between 4 and 5. All right, y'all ready to go? All right, well, let's pray and we'll jump in. Lord, as we gather in your name for this, we are grateful as we move into another part of the book of Daniel where we look at someone whose character, disposition of heart is a failure to yield. And there's something inside of the human spirit that agrees with this, and yet what is needed often to grow in faith is a yielding. It is a humbling of oneself in your presence. So we pray for our understanding today in the text, not just what the text says, but we're always after an applied type of learning where what we read and what we study, what we discuss, is leveraged by your Spirit in such a way that creates a harvest inside of us, and we want that harvest to be your image, your kingdom. So we pray this in your name. Amen. All right, so let's jump in. If somebody would read verses 1 through 4, this will set the stage for us as we look at Belshazzar. And just do your best if you come to a name that, you know, it is what it is. I don't think there's many children being baptized by the name of Belshazzar, you know, or all right.
King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and their concubines might drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone.
All right, so we have at least the beginning of the setting of this. So if we'd have to go back, I think it's Hezekiah. So you got to go back a good ways. You know, probably what I'm going to guess 75, 80 years. This is when the southern kingdom, Judah, is still around. So it would be before Nebuchadnezzar is even made king or ruler of Babylon. His father is the ruler, and Nebuchadnezzar is the chief general. Even before that, Nebuchadnezzar's father is with Hezekiah, maybe trying to hammer out a treaty and against the Assyrians. And Hezekiah showed Nebuchadnezzar's father all the different gold that the southern kingdom, Judah, had in the temple. And so it was just a matter of years before, you know, once the Babylons defeated the Assyrians, then, you know, they're obviously it doesn't take a, you know, you can put one and one together that all of a sudden he's going to come for all the gold that the southern kingdom has, which he did. And he wipes out the southern kingdom, Judah, deports Daniel and a number of other folks, but also takes all the gold, those gold goblets, all the things that they used inside of the temple and inside of the king used. They stored that as they did when they conquered other empires. So this is years after that. New guy on the block wants to take out the old stuff and bring it to a party. Now, you also there's a lot of things going on that's not mentioned in the Bible that historical records tell us. What we do know at this time is that the Medes and the Persians are on the rise. they actually have pushed the Babylonians back so that the only thing that's remaining is the city of Babylon. All right? And the reason why it's still remaining is because this is the Euphrates River right here. And actually, what they did was, militarily speaking, pretty smart. They created a moat that traveled all around the city, and then they had these huge walls that were anywhere from 25 to 40 feet high. So it was darn near impossible for an army to invade this city. Although that the Persians they were camping about, I don't know, maybe 5, 10, 20 miles outside of the city, where they've just pushed back the Babylonians. So the Babylonians know that they're on their way out, or at least they're encamped now inside their city. But they have the thought that there hasn't been an army that's around that could invade the city. So the new king, or at least the vice regent, who has the throne, we don't know how long. We do know that his dad was king for 17 years. At some point in the 17 years, he goes to build this huge temple, and we really don't hear about him ever again. So he left the reins to his son. So we don't know if his son's been there for 6 months, a year, but it hasn't been long. And he's inherited an empire that now has the Persians knocking on their door. So they've retreated in, and so Belshazzar has a party for, how many did it say, 1,000? Yeah, for 1,000 of his lords, and they drank wine in front of the 1,000. What's interesting is that normally, and this is not uncommon for them to do things like this. The king Xerxes and Darius, who were kings of Persia, they actually had a party. I mean, it wasn't uncommon for them to have a feast that would go on for 6 months, where they would feed all the lords and what have you. I mean, so it's common in that time. I can't imagine what that would be like, but normally what happens whenever they do this, the king is not present. And some of that could be for reasons that, assassinations, whatever it may be. But Belshazzar is inherited a throne that's crumbling. So one of the things what he did do was to have a feast for 1,000 of his lords, and he was there in their presence, and he's eating and drinking with them. What most people believe, and I think this is a good rationale behind all this, is he's doing this to bolster the people, because the Persians are, basically a day's travel from the city. So you can imagine that, the empire's burning, and he's wanting to give at least the appearance that, it's all good. We're going to have this big feast. You're going to do it at my hand. Nobody can invade us. Our city's going to be well protected. We have a water source. And there's all these documents, Babylonian documents, that talked about how they could go for months, if not years, with food. So, I mean, it's sort of, I'm sitting in my castle, all is good, we have nothing to worry about. And so he's, to some degree, encouraging the people, at least his lords, maybe some of his leaders. At the same time, he's creating this image that all is going to be okay, and, all things are going to be good. So, I mean, you can see the rationale behind this. Again, it wasn't, it's definitely not uncommon in ancient times for them to have these giant parties like this. He's there. His presence is there to bolster everybody, to encourage them. And so, as you can imagine what's happened, they're pretty good into the wine. And then it's, let me sort of go back and reclaim and remind you again of the greatness of Babylon. So how are you going to do that? You're going to take out your war trophies. And so that's what he did. And it's not, now, what's only mentioned in the book of Daniel are the vessels, the gold and silver, as it related to Jerusalem. Now, what most people believe, and I would agree with this, he probably brought it all out. Other empires that they conquered, and I mean, it was a show of strength. Look how great we are, and you can trust me. I'm the new ruler. All is going to be well. But at some point, the party turns into something similar to an orgy. And on top of that, he has stuff that was consecrated for the temple to be a part of it. So you can kind of sense the foreshadowing. Normally, whenever that has happened in the Old Testament or the New Testament, this does not end well for people. But this is, they do mention that the wives are there, the concubines are there. They're participating in the party. It wasn't uncommon in Babylonian history for things like this to turn into something sexual, all while the Persians are on the doorsteps. But at least what Belshazzar is trying to create is that you don't have anything to worry about. We're safe behind the walls. So that's the image. He's encouraging everybody there, and he's trying to bolster all the people so that they will just sort of kind of sit tight and just realize that Babylonian is strong as ever. But he commits this, this sacrilegious act against the God of Israel by taking the gold and the silver goblets from the temple in Jerusalem. It's about 50, 60 years before. And basically uses that as part of this drunken festival, which is an act of blasphemy against Yahweh. And so, I mean, again, you can see what's about to happen, or at least what we think is going to happen. He probably blasphemed all the different deities from other empires. Didn't just single out Yahweh. Of course, Daniel is singling out Yahweh because Yahweh answers, which is what chapter 5 is. Yahweh's answer to what Belshazzar is doing, which is this level of desecration of the holy objects that at least were tied to Israel. To some degree, this is a deliberate act of defiance. Y'all cold? I think it feels good. So, I mean, feels great to me. But this is an act of defiance against Yahweh, against his authority and his power. And so think about what the major theme of the book of Daniel is. It's about whose sovereignty? God's sovereignty. And so just like Nebuchadnezzar walking around on Babylon one day and looking over the empire and from chapter 4 and saying, look at all the things that I've done. This is the same thing, but in really, this is not just looking at the empire and saying it's the result of my hands. What this is a direct slap across the face to Yahweh. As if to say, under my leadership, all is going to be safe, all is going to be fine. So this should warm it up a little bit. So hopefully it would. If not, we'll take 2 breaks and you can do like jumping jacks or something like that to get the blood running. So, but chapter 5, Yahweh responds back, and what's interesting is that he would have known of what happened at the end of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So he would have known about chapter 4. And so in light of that, his act here is worse than Nebuchadnezzar saying, look at all the things that I've created at my hand. This is, you might have humbled Nebuchadnezzar, but you'll never conquer me. In fact, nobody will. So you can get the kind of the at least the sense of what the king is doing here at this feast, which is interesting. So let's see how God responds. All right. So if somebody would read verses 5 and 6.
Suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his knees knocked together and his legs gave way.
So this is the sobering up within seconds. And from a night of drinking to all of a sudden, uh-oh. So what happened is he sees this writing on the wall. Some argue, is he the only one who saw it? Or were there other people who saw it? I mean, we don't know 100%. I think there's enough contextual clues that would lead us to believe that other people saw it, because in a few moments when he calls for the wise men and all the astrologers and that whole group of people to help interpret what's going on, obviously they see it. If not, they wouldn't know what are they being asked to do. But you see God's response, and it's the walls were white, and so any writing would have stood out clearly. We do know that about the walls inside of all of this. That you can. I mean, you probably can Google it up where they've dug those up. What's interesting is the literal language is that he became terrified. His face turned pale. In verse 6, the thought easily could have been, I've just offended God, and so today I'm going to die. I mean, the literal about where it says his knees were knocking. Does anybody have anything other than the knees were knocking? The literal language is pretty cool. The joints of his loin were loosened. So his hips came out. So I mean, you can. That's pretty detailed information. Obviously there's some level of response. We don't know exactly what it is, other than there's writing on the wall, and it came after he blasphemed Yahweh. So. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So, this is, I don't know, this is kind of how my ADD brain works. When you mentioned Halloween last night, y'all ever watch the Great British Baking Show on Netflix? Well, it just happened to be, Brooke and I are working our way through the new season, and we just turned it on, and by chance, it was the Halloween episode. So, when you said appropriate for Halloween, I was like, hey, look at this, babe. I planned it this way, but anyway, it's definitely appropriate. Something else for sure. Anything else stands out in the text to you that you find sort of noteworthy? All right, well, let's keep going. Then if somebody would read verses 7 through 9. All right.
The king cried aloud to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. The king said to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. Then King Balthazar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed.
Yeah, so we get that word. What's it say? Verse. The king called loudly. In the literal translation is he's yelling, almost like in a panic fear, and so he calls in his interpreters to help interpret what's going on. They can't read it, or at least they can't interpret it. There's debate on whether or not they see it or don't see it. But there's a threefold promise. So if you could deliver on given the interpretation of what what's being written on the wall, and then what the interpretation is, you receive what? Purple robe, all right? So purple, yeah. So and a gold chain, and what else? And you're now the third highest ruler. So first highest ruler would have been, father, then son, and then it would have been whoever this third person would be. And now keep in mind, Daniel is probably, he's been in, he's been in Babylon for like 60 years. So he's probably upper 70s. So you can get an idea. This again, so he's a young man. That's right. Yeah, he's coming into his prime. But he's witnessed pretty much all of the history of Babylon, but obviously you got new rulers. They're probably had a change in turnover. Most likely Daniel's retired, sitting on a bank fishing. Who knows? But he's not necessarily as part of. When we leave chapter 4, Daniel is of pretty significant rank. You'll find out later in chapter 5 that because of that difference in time, Daniel is somewhere else, and it would make sense that he's probably out of the leadership for right reasons. Because you have new kings, and you had multiple kings between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. So we don't know we don't know anything about Daniel just yet, but we do know that the new king blasphemes Yahweh in a horrible way, writing on the wall, calls for help, nobody can answer. And either they can't read the writing, or they can't interpret it. I kind of lean on the side of probably can't interpret it, because it's just 4 words that are written. We're going to find that out in just a little bit. Now according to Jewish tradition, now this is just tradition, so it's nothing. Instead of the letters were. Instead of being, they were written vertically instead of horizontally. That's what some say. Whether or not that's true or not, who knows? But whatever it is, they can't interpret it. They don't know what the meaning is, and so the king is in a panic, in a pretty serious way. What would you have done if you were the king? You're calling for all your heavyweights to come in, and not a single one of them can kind of help you. And obviously you know that the writing has something to do with you, because it comes right on the heels of his interaction inside the party. So let's keep going. And so now they couldn't answer it. So enter one of the saviors, verse 10. So let's read 10 through 12. So we have enter another person, now the queen. So there's a lot of debate on how did we get to where you have this son of Nebuchadnezzar, things, who is this woman? Is she Belshazzar's wife? Most people would argue that they're not. It's probably the queen mother. And we don't get this from the text, but in some of the Babylonian writings, if you were to research those, there are some documents that normally what happened when one king, like when Nebuchadnezzar died, it's not unheard of for the next king to inherit the harem of the previous king, and sometimes even their wives, right? Or what they would do is they would maybe marry one of Nebuchadnezzar's daughters, or maybe even marry like one of the wives, so that it could bolster their standing for the throne. So what most people believe, and this is some other documents that would give some evidence to this, is that Belshazzar's dad probably married one of Nebuchadnezzar's daughters, or maybe married the daughter and then adopted one of Nebuchadnezzar's children to increase that. If you're looking for the son of, because there's no way that this guy can ever be the son of Nebuchadnezzar, correct? It doesn't work. Or what it could be, that's one way, is that they've tried to work out, what's the bloodline here. Or what it could be is that, Jesus is called the son of what? Keep going. Son of David. Now, was Jesus David's son? Absolutely not. So it's just part of the lineage down the line. You also have the Israelites are called the son of who? Or the sons of Abraham, sons of Judah. But are they Judah or Abraham's sons? No. They're not. Down the line, yes. So there could be something similar to that going on in the passage. Either some way of preserving the bloodline, or I would argue most likely that this is just in line of Nebuchadnezzar was the greatest king of Babylon, so it could be that you want to be associated in some form or fashion by being called the son of, or whatever it may be, similar to what shows up in the Old Testament, because he's not the literal son. No, these are not all families. These are not all the same family. These are just the different kings. And so some of them are assassinated. Nebuchadnezzar did have a bunch of daughters, so we don't know if he ended up, one of these married Nebuchadnezzar's daughter. Excuse me. Because a lot of folks have asked, who's the queen? Who's the woman? And if it would be the queen, then it would be, it could be his wife. Most likely, they think Queen Mother, who Nabondius, I guess that's how you would say it, is somehow married into Nebuchadnezzar's line. We don't know. You do know some of that. We just don't know if it's the literal or if it's a figurative title. But there is this woman who wasn't at the party. That's clear in the text, right? She's just maybe down the hallway, or maybe her attendant got word that the wise men couldn't solve it. She has some historical knowledge of Daniel, so she rushes in to Belshazzar to say, guess what? There is some help. Call Daniel. Because Daniel, to quote some of our youth, has mad skills when it comes to solving problems. So obviously Daniel's reputation, his history is still, it's buried somewhere in different people's minds. And she gives a level of resume of Daniel. What is it, verse 12? This man Daniel, whom the king called Belshazzar, was found to have a keen mind, knowledge, and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams explain riddles, and solve difficult problems, which is not bad, I would imagine. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. So now we have at least the beginning where Daniel's going to come back into the passage. And so let's keep reading. And so that would be, what are we at? Verse 13. So let's read verses 13 through 16. Someone would be, please.
Can I ask you a question first?
You can.
Is it funny that David is still called the chief over the magicians and all? That he-
Daniel.
Daniel, that he doesn't, and that they still think he's I guess they think he's a magician.
Yeah, so he would be in that line of magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans. I mean, they're a group of about 4 different folks.
They don't realize a link between him and God.
Well, Nebuchadnezzar did in chapter 4, or 2 in chapter 4. Whether or not they're drawing that connection, probably not, other than that they know that he has the ability to do this. In previous chapters, we know that Daniel says the reason I can do this is because of God. In 23 years, that's probably been lost. We're reading Daniel 1 week at a time. And so we've just covered 43 years of history in about 6 weeks.
But it's still the same person that doesn't hold to that, isn't it?
Same person as in...
Same person that they're calling the chief over the magicians.
Yeah, so it would be one of those things like if a senator is retired, you still call him or her senator, or if they were former senator, but you still call them by their title. So you could easily, I would imagine something like that is going on here. Whether or not he's in active service, that I don't know. I mean, he's not there. He wasn't at the party, and obviously the other wise people aren't calling for Daniel. The one who calls for Daniel is someone who dates back, or at least has some understanding back in Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Does that make sense? I hope it does. So ask again. Keep asking.
I'm surprised that it doesn't say a man of God can read it, interpret this for you instead of a magician.
Well, this is according to Babylonian language. Now, if this would have been, say Chronicles, where it's written in from the eyes of the kings, then it probably would say man of God. But from the eyes of from Babylon, they're polytheistic. If they were going to call someone a man of God, they probably would use the word Marduk, who was the chief god in Babylon. Marduk. This guy's named after the major god in Babylonian understanding. All right, so we got some puzzled looks. Where are we at?
Well, this, in the next paragraph, it talks about Belshazzar recognizing him as a man that has the spirit of God.
Right, which would basically mean he's in touch with spiritual things, but they're not. The only one inside of the book of Daniel that gives remotely a shout out to Yahweh is Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4. In chapter 2, when Daniel is able to tell the dream and interpret it when nobody else can, Nebuchadnezzar, because Daniel would have been young then, Nebuchadnezzar says, obviously he's in touch. He's a seer. He can see into things because he's in touch with the divine, and he says he is in touch with gods. It's plural in chapter 2. The doxologies in chapter 4 are important because in Nebuchadnezzar, he elevates Yahweh even higher than others. But that only comes after he's done 7 years in the desert, or actually eating grass and acting like an animal. And when he finally repents and he is restored, then it's like, oh, this God definitely is someone we can't trifle with. But it's not like all of Babylon become Jewish. That doesn't happen. I mean, because this is not written from so chapter 1 is written in one language, 2 through 6 or 7 is written in Aramaic, which would have been cuneiform was the actual writing itself. What they spoke in Babylon was a form of Aramaic or Chaldean language. So their writing, it actually changes from one language to the next. So this, from chapter 2 through chapter 6, it's written from, Daniel might be writing it, but it's written from a perspective of Babylonian leaders. Daniel's a part of it. Now, when we get to chapter 7 through the rest of the book, it's straight up Daniel's dreams. So now Daniel's first person. Here it's third person Daniel. Still like the Old Testament? It's all your fault, Mimi. You said Daniel, right? So, I don't want you to be, Daniel's not, Daniel the book, and even, I would argue, large portions of the Old Testament, if it doesn't put it in language, Christian language that we like man of God or something like that, that, for Babylonian people to say he's in touch with the divine, and then Daniel says, no, I'm in touch with one, Yahweh, then that's about as close as you're going to get to being like Samuel, a prophet, mighty indeed, or a man of God, in books in the Old Testament that are written strictly for and about either Israel or Judah. So you have to see the context of what's going on. Esther's another book, right? So, Esther's written in the time of the Persians. All right, so you have Persian kings are the ones that Esther deals with. So you have to see them in their context, and so they're going to use language that has that's similar to other parts of the Old Testament, but a lot of this is very similar to what's going on in the Babylonian world, because that's the environment, that's the setting. Daniel's been gone from Jerusalem for 60 years. So it's keep that in mind too, and he never returns. So Daniel dies in Babylon under Persian rules then, or Persian rulers, because Babylon falls at this night, all right, and new guy comes in, Darius, and Darius rules for a little bit, and eventually the Medes sort of kind of transition into the Persians, and the Persians rule until the time of Alexander the Great. They're on the top of the mound for a while, and then the Greeks have it for a while, and then eventually come the Romans, and the Romans have it for a long time. But by that time, we're in the New Testament, so everybody will feel better. All right, so tell me what you're processing, because you're either you went out trick or treating last night, and you're tired, or you feel. What I perceive is that we're laboring through this. Like we're swallowing something that's heavy to swallow. We all good? You want to take a break? Yeah, let's take a break for 10 minutes. We'll come back. All right, we'll come back leisurely. Yeah, so we're never in a hurry here. So we operate on Kairos time, not Chronos time. History for Babylon or history in general? Yeah, it's going to be all over the place. I mean, you'd have to go look at different empires and how they, some of the first ones who, Sanskrit is some of the first, and then you get into cuneiform, which is a little bit more advanced. You've got Egyptian, writing on caves. I mean, so there's a. The answer to that question is going to be, it's going to look like this, because it depends on are you talking about Egyptian history? Are you talking about this history? I mean, so it's going to be very difficult to pin down. The question was, when was history written down? I mean, you have to go back and probably look at the beginning of writing. But that what predates all the writing is oral history. And so what's being passed down either from chief to chief, family member to family member, now they did, what historians assume is that there was this, this knowledge that was passed down from, one to, down through conversations around the table or the campfire or whatever it may be. But the record of history is going to parallel the history of written communication, writing, and it's going to parallel whatever empire or kingdom you're talking about. So it's not all the world got it on so and so BC. I mean it's going to look different throughout different areas. So. All right, all good now. Yeah, got a breath and a break. We're ready to go. So here's where it's going to get really good, and because what we're going to find out is that so the queen told the king, or the queen mother told the king about there was this one guy back in Nebuchadnezzar days. So again, that's 23 years before, who was a chief of wise men and had the ability to interpret dreams. Actually, it's a pretty good resume. Loosen knots. I mean, all these things that this evidently Daniel back in the day, which we're aware of because we've been studying the book of Daniel, had the ability to either interpret dreams or solve problems. So now the king is going to call for Daniel to come forward. This is verse 13, and I'll read verses 13 through 16. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, "You are," notice how he says this, "you are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah. I've heard of you that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing and make known to me its interpretation, but they could not show the interpretation of that matter. But I have heard that you can give interpretation and solve problems. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." Now, what's interesting here is that Daniel is called in. Again, Daniel's probably 80, retired, semi-retired. Most likely, you have a new king that had its own, whenever a new king would, so think back to chapter 2. When Nebuchadnezzar inherits the throne from his father, his first dream is about a year or two, maybe 3 years into his reign. And the dream is troubling. And so he's going to not only fire all the wise men, but when they cannot tell the dream and interpret it, what does he say he's going to do? Not just fire them, he's going to what? Kill them. That's exactly right. Kill them, kill everybody. Eventually, the word gets to Daniel. Daniel calls his 3 buddies in. Let's pray to God to tell us the dream and the interpretation, because they would be on the chopping block. So they went in, they prayed. That night, Daniel is told the dream and the interpretation, and he goes before Nebuchadnezzar the next day or within a day or so, and answers for Nebuchadnezzar the dream and its interpretation. So under Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel rose to a certain level of power as one of the chief wise men. 23 years later, you have a new regime that's in power, and he's older. And so the odds are Belshazzar is not familiar with him. He would have surrounded himself with people that he trusted, because they've already killed a few people along the way in order to inherit the throne. So it stands to reason that the reason why Daniel wasn't just sitting in the wings waiting for him to call is 23 years ago. The last time Daniel was in any level of leadership. So and notice how when Belshazzar called for Daniel, who's still trying to exert his power? She's already gone. So how does Belshazzar? So Belshazzar wants to remind Daniel that Daniel, that's exactly right. You're only here at the hand of us. All right, so go back and look at verse 13. Daniel's brought before the king. The king said to Daniel, "You are that Daniel, one of what? The exiles from Judah." So let me go back now, 60-something years back to when you were a teenager and we deported you. So Belshazzar, one of the things that Belshazzar is doing, so go back to the whole reason why he had the party and the feast in the first place, to show how big he is. I'm the big man on campus. And so now when he's got a problem, nobody can solve it. Queen Mother comes in and says, "Hey, last ditch effort over here is this guy named Daniel." As soon as Daniel is in his presence, to use what my son says, the king is flexing on Daniel. That's what he's doing. Hey, don't you remember? Let's just kind of set the stage here. You're one of the exiles. I'm the king. Says, "You're one of the exiles from Judah, whom the king, my father, brought from Judah. I have heard of you that the spirit of the gods," which is different than chapter 4. Because in chapter 4, whenever Nebuchadnezzar talked about Daniel, it says the spirit of the holy gods. So, you get a little bit of play going on in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now, the wise men couldn't do it. Keep on going. Daniel, if you can do it, I'll make good on the same promise. You get purple clothing, gold chain, third ruler in the kingdom. So let's look at how Daniel responds, because to use again youth language, Daniel is about to flex back on the king. All right? So let's see how he responds. Let's look at verses 17. We'll go through 24. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, "Let your gifts be for..." That's pretty good, isn't it? "Let your gifts be for yourself, and give your reward to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship, greatness, and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up, and whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened, so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven from among the children of mankind," or humanity, "and his mind was made like that of a beast. and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heavens, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind or humanity, and set over it whom he will. And you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this, but you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven. And the vessels of his house have been brought in before you, and you and your lords, your wives and your concubines, have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the God of silver and of gold and of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see, nor hear, or know, but the God in whose hands your breath and whose are all your ways you have not honored. That's pretty bold, isn't it? So, I mean, notice, so Queen Mother comes in, says, call on Daniel. I remember Daniel from the old days. He can help you. King calls Daniel in, wants to set the stage of who's still the most powerful one. Belshazzar saying, it's me, the king. And yet Daniel's answer is a history lesson, which is your father, in some form or fashion, Nebuchadnezzar, the only reason Babylon existed was at the hand of Yahweh in the first place. And then when Nebuchadnezzar forgot that, he was humbled. Then when he repented, he was restored. And now you have the reins, and you're worse than he is. That's pretty bold. Yeah, so...
He also say that Nebuchadnezzar had a kingdom of greatness and glory and majesty, and this guy's sitting on a crumbling kingdom.
That's exactly right. And I mean, so Daniel, none of this is lost, in Daniel's mind. I mean, he is aware of what's going on, whether he knew about it or whether he was told in the process of being summoned before the king. Daniel balanced the scales quickly. Because keep in mind, when we looked at I showed that video that Joanne introduced us to, the Bible Project. The book of Daniel follows a pattern. And chapter 4 and chapter 5 are, they're cousins. Chapter 4, you've got Nebuchadnezzar. Oh, it's wet. Anyway, you got Nebuchadnezzar and his inability to acknowledge that everything at his hand still is because of Yahweh. Chapter 5, it's the same thing, different king. And Nebuchadnezzar is humbled, repents, and then is restored. Belshazzar is humbled, we're about to see, doesn't repent, and guess how it ends? He dies tonight. Because what we're about to read is that the Persians are attacking the city.
Well, it seems too that Daniel's pointing out, you knew all this history, and yet you denied
Sure.
that God was all-powerful and responsible for your strength.
Absolutely. Notice the whole reason of the feast. The reason why chapter 5 begins with the setting is because that gives you the context. Belshazzar is setting himself up in front of everybody to say, I'm the big man here. I'm the person that is, you just sit with me and I've got it all covered. And failure to recognize that even someone larger than him even existed. And so basically, it's almost like a sermon that Daniel gave. He concludes his sermon by telling Belshazzar that, because of your blasphemous ways and your defiance in front of Yahweh, it's not going to end well for you. Very, very reminiscent of other prophets. Amos. If you go back and look at Amos, Amos lived just in the most northern part of the southern kingdom. So he's just just south of the Mason-Dixon line. And he's able to look over into the north, and he's watching what the king and the queen are doing. And for years, he's just watching it sort of kind of crumble. And so finally, he starts to weigh in. So let's see what else happens, because now he's going to look, and you get what's written. Verse 24, then from his presence the hand was sent, and his writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that was inscribed: Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. So just 4 words, really 3 words, 2 words written twice. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed, and in the balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple, chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him, and he should be the 3rd ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So 4 words. 1 word means weighed. So it's been, weighed. So in English, it would have said weighed, weighed. Weighed, measured, divided. So that's basically, what it would have been in English. Numbered, so same thing, number, and then measured or weighed, and then divided. Number, weighed, divided. I was wrong. Thank you. But just 4 words, and Daniel is able to interpret the writing on the wall, and in doing so, pretty much give insight into Belshazzar that this is his last night. Notice that he did give Daniel, the goodies, the purple clothing, the gold necklace, and he was pronounced that he was 3rd in leadership or in ruling ability, but it really doesn't matter, because within hours, the Medes and the Persians would overtake the city. Now, we don't have this in the Bible, but what happened is that north of the city, the Persians dammed up the Euphrates. And so all this water basically came, it was almost like just a little swampy area. And so in the middle of the night, the Persians were able to attack from the north and from the south and from the sides. And they were able to, and then what's also interesting is that, Belshazzar was not a nice guy. There's a lot of writings about how cruel he was. He actually killed, I forgot which one of the sons from a former king. Well, another son left the empire years before, actually teamed up with the Medes and was one of the guides that helped lead the Medes in, and was able to get some level of vengeance on Belshazzar for killing his brother. So it's a nice little soap opera going on here. If you want to go and spend some time reading the history. We thought British history was interesting. Just go back into the Babylonians, you get all kinds of stuff. But he's measured, or he's numbered, he's measured, he's weighed, and found wanting, and it ends with his death. And so then the Babylonians are gone. They're now off into history, and the next people on the block are the Medes and the Persians. And so the rest of the book, like Daniel chapter 6, where we next week, or not next week, but the week after, when we look at the lion's den, it's a new king. It's Darius, the king of the Medes and the Persians. So the Babylonians they're out the door. But there's other like Greek historians have written about chapter 5. Other historians have written about chapter 5, and they're all in agreement that the night that there was this big party, the Medes and the Persians invaded, and they killed the king. And there's, I mean, they go into great detail about how they killed him too. So, it's if you want. Well, it's multiple stabbings. So, I mean, the king was going to take his own life. They stopped him from doing that, and then they were happy to finish the deal for him. So, but again, all right, so what's the significance of chapter 5? So the major theme of the book of Daniel, and this shows up in every chapter, is who ultimately is sovereign. That's exactly right. And so, and even though we're talking about, pagan or non-Jewish kings and empires, all of that still is at the hand of God. And a failure to recognize God's sovereignty ends poorly.
Because man that becomes in power, and he has that power and that pride, this is what happens. And it's,
So are you making a general statement about humanity, or are you making a general statement about America? I mean, so.
no, well, if you want to put it that,
No, I'm not going to put it that way. So, I mean,
people,
yeah, you're correct. All right, so,
I'm not saying America or
yeah, one of the,
saying mankind.
so one of the struggles is, what does the world look like after Genesis 3? Bingo. So it doesn't matter what empire you're talking about. It doesn't matter what ruler. It doesn't. We don't have to talk about rulers. There's always going to be a temptation with rulers when it comes to corruption. Most people, and maybe I'm looking at a group that doesn't fit this bill, but most people are not disciplined by nature. So when you're left unchecked, what happens? Do you trend upward or do you trend downward? Most people will trend downward. So it's the same thing that shows up inside of the Old Testament, the New Testament, or today. When humanity by nature will be defiant to any ruler. All right? So Genesis 3 is a perfect example of this. Who said you don't have to eat from every tree? The fruit looks good. I want to take a bite. So the consequences of that is we're living in a Genesis 3 world. That has not changed. The goodness of God is that there's redemption, and whether that comes now or in the future, there's redemption. But in any kingdom or in any government, there's going to be people that are corrupted because of power. And that's not a Christian or non-Christian thing. That's not a red or a blue thing, because all of them got problems. It's sure that's what I'm just elaborating on your point. And but the idea that says that one party holds the purity of faith and another, I hope you don't believe that, because that has never existed that way. It doesn't matter what history you're looking at or what kingdom you're studying. So now you're getting Shane's opinion here, but I'll be happy to back it up if you want it. It is what it is. You're dealing with human nature, and then when you start to, Christianity can work in any level of government. It has worked in fascism. It has worked with, in every style of government, Christianity can live. I'm not saying it's the best. I think actually the society we have here inside the United States is the best one of the modern day experiences, of rule or government. But that's different than other world religions. Other world religions, it has to be a certain style of government under a certain way. And that just hadn't been the case with Christianity. When they've had kings and queens and fascists and non-fascists, people have been Christians. So that's free. Not part of the book of Daniel.
When Nebuchadnezzar asked Daniel to interpret a dream, Daniel said, "I wish it wasn't true," and he felt bad for Nebuchadnezzar. any of that with Belshazzar.
Yeah, Belshazzar.
Belshazzar didn't ask him, what can I do, either, did he?
No, I mean, historically speaking, this guy is not a nice person. I mean, there are all types of accounts of his brutality.
But Nebuchadnezzar didn't start out.
No, they're not. They're not. But I mean, this, if by Babylonian accounts, they call this guy evil. So I mean, you know, it's like he's the evil of the evils. I mean, or whatever. He's the worst of the bunch. And you know, but now when in chapter 4, when Daniel gives the interpretation to Nebuchadnezzar, there is that phrase, "but you," which shows up in the Old Testament. That is the same wording that Nathan gave to David, that other prophets have given to other kings, as if to say, you are the one in the crosshairs. And it's not a kind, oh, you know, oh, you're the one in the crosshairs. It's like, you know, pack a lunch because here it comes. You know, that type of stuff.
Man, you just tell that guy you're done.
Yeah, and listen, he's also at an age where, you know, I eat lunch with a father figure in my life who's 85 years old, and we've been eating together for about 20 years. He will remind me that he's at the age and station in life that he really doesn't care what he says or whether or not people like it. Now, when we first started eating, that was not the case, but he'll tell you now, yeah, if they don't like it, you know, that's their problem, not mine. He says, at 85, I don't care anymore. So there could be a little bit of that going on with Daniel. They don't live as long as they're not living as long as we are. And, well, so in the Old Testament, numbers can be figurative and symbolic, and they can be literal. So whether or not somebody lived 949 years, I don't know. I mean, I don't mean that. I'm not trying to say no, because there's evidence on both sides. I mean, that's like trying to say in Genesis 1, are those days, day 1, day 2, day 3, are they literally 24-hour days, or are they talking about time periods? I mean, you know, that I don't. I mean, I don't know. And so, I mean, your guess. I don't mean this to not dodge the question. There's evidence on either side, you know. Yeah, 80, I mean, you know, we are living longer, generally speaking, today than previous histories. But, you know, by ancient world times, Daniel is old, like really old. So, well, you know, we're living longer. It's not the same, all right? So, all right, so this is a good point, though. Keep in mind that, you know, when we want to ask of the Bible modern-day questions, like of chronological time, that is a big deal since the Enlightenment period, because we chart things that way. In the ancient world, they didn't chart things that way. It would be when it happened this way. No different. So the closest analogy would be is if I asked you to give me the history of your life, you would just hit the high points, or maybe highs and lows. But you wouldn't give me day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. Just since the last couple hundred years, that is how we chart things, how we process things. They just didn't do that back when all this was written. It just wasn't the same importance as it is now. I mean, you know, we scientific method, this is probably more than what you want. So scientific method changed things. You remember scientific method? Yeah, so, you know, you start with something, hypothesis, you test it, and then you make your judgments after that. So we see the world through that in various ways, even literature. I mean, you higher criticisms. You know, we do that naturally just because we've been conditioned to do that for years. But you know, they didn't do that when these things were written. And that's not bad. Again, it's just whenever we ask a question of the Bible that the Bible doesn't ask or even concern itself with, that doesn't mean the Bible doesn't care. It just wasn't a part of the deal. I mean, didn't register like it does today. So we have to just be careful, because what we can do then is we can read into the passage what we want the passage to say, and yet that wasn't the original intention of either the writer at that time. So when the psalmist says, I am lower than a worm, now is that literal? Or maybe the psalmist is just trying to say, I'm depressed and I'm broken. So, I mean, so the genre of the writing is poetic. So when you read poetry, do you interpret that the same way that you would read the Wall Street Journal? Probably not. At least I hope you wouldn't. So we have to see some of this in the genre and the light of what the author is trying to accomplish. Good questions, though, all the way around. Prayer list. Yes, I have the food list. So let's see who won the lottery. Next week, you get a bye. That's Becky Averett and Patty Lipscomb. So y'all get a bye. Yeah. Then the next week, oh, yes, Becky and Joyce, y'all are down for double duty. What we missed on the 8th and what we're eating on the 15th. But now, the good news is that Kathy is, I think, emailing the people individually if it's their week. So you would get that. But well done you, Becky, to remember. That's good job you. So not meeting next week, November the 8th, because of elections. But we will meet November the 15th. All right, last question before we leave. Anybody got one? All good? All right, go in peace. We'll pick up Daniel 6. Not next week, because we're off. Yeah, Daniel 6 on the 15th.